Today's episode of Filmmaker U is brought to you by our sponsors OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. And it's also brought to you by our other sponsors, AJA. Make sure to check out aja.com so that you can see how they can help you in your post-production needs. Hi, I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com, or of course follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_u. Every week we interview a film professional to discuss their work, and this week I'm joined by cinematographer Ari Wegner, whose work includes Stray, The Girlfriend Experience, and The Power of the Dog, just to name a few. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I guess my first question is, how did you get involved with The Power of the Dog?
I had actually worked with Jane a few years before the film kind of came to exist. We'd done a small commercial together. And then, cut to 2 years later, she kind of got in touch out of the blue and just said, like, what are you up to the next couple of years? Are you available? You want to chat more about this book that I've just read? So yeah, I was kind of, that's the call that I think everyone dreams of.
Yeah. Now, did you read the book or the script first? Or did you just choose one to read?
When she first got in touch, the script was kind of still being written. Jane did the adaptation, which is an incredible, beautiful adaptation. But at the time, it was still being written. So I read the book kind of, as soon as I hung up the phone, I pretty much started Googling next day delivery. And I read it pretty much back to back. I read it and then I read it straight away again. It's such a great, beautiful book. I definitely recommend, if anyone enjoyed the film, the book's just a lovely kind of way to re-experience it, and has, again, like incredible kind of backstory and tangents. And it's actually it's an amazing skill. It's like kind of underappreciated, I think, and how difficult an adaptation is to do, because a book is such a different document to a screenplay, and there's so many things you can do in a book that you can't do in a screenplay, or you can't mainly I guess, like that first person kind of internal thought process that, and it's just, there isn't necessarily a visual way to represent that, and as we know, visuals are kind of that's what I do. But so it's, if you watch the film, read the book, you can really see what Jane's kind of chosen to include, and some things that she's added that allowed kind of a physical manifestation or like representation of some of those internal thoughts, which are so hard to get on camera.
So one of the things I appreciated was, I don't even know how to explain this, but it's like the tail end of the West in a sense. So like the railways made it out. We're starting to see things build up. But one of the things when I think back of, like, The Searchers or all these classic Westerns, is the vista, and like trying to create that sort of, I guess, man versus nature in the story. How did you approach that with this film, as the world is now becoming more inhabited with people?
Yeah, the landscape's such an interesting element of what we do, and it's, you've got the people, and then beyond that is going to be something. And yeah, landscape is so powerful in terms of its sense of place and the kind of overall, I don't know, flavor of a film, and how much to include it, how much interior, how much exterior do you have. And obviously this film has some really important scenes that happen both inside and outside. They're both two very kind of different environments. And I think as well, the role the landscape plays in this film, it's not just a backdrop, but it's really Phil as a character. It's really personal for him. He's very kind of personally attached to this place that he kind of considers his, and it is really very attached to kind of nostalgia and this other time that he yearns for. So for him, actually, he's someone that we always said, all this kind of, I remember Jane saying, we talked about it a lot, for Phil, kind of everything that is good has already happened. That he's kind of nostalgic for the past and is kind of quite anti-change. So these kind of, the landscape is what he has kind of to grip onto. It's something that doesn't change. He's very emotionally kind of attached. Everything kind of has a meaning. So I think it's kind of, yeah, it's like you said, it's hard to kind of quantify, but I guess choosing the location was a big starting point. When I came on, we already knew that we were going to be shooting in New Zealand. Jane had kind of scouted in Montana and actually went to the ranch where Thomas Savage's family kind of still live. And for a number of reasons, it made more sense actually to be in New Zealand, which Jane, knows incredibly well. And we wanted a location that we could shoot 360 and to not have to kind of avoid areas that had been developed or a freeway that was kind of just there. We wanted to find a place where we could really like be in the bubble of the world and kind of almost preserve that romance of that time. And because it is set in Montana in the 1920s, but it's also kind of a memory of that, or it's still a fictionalized kind of place. So yeah, it's maybe, I'm not sure if that's actually answered the question, but landscape's obviously like incredibly important. And then also, I guess, choosing how to shoot it, what lenses to shoot on as well. The mountains, they're kind of quite close. They need to feel kind of close, that you can almost touch them. They can't feel too distant for that, I think, for that emotional connection. So we chose often when we're outside to shoot on quite long lenses and a deep stop, so we could kind of not have it all just blurry back there, but to see it and see the foreground. I guess what happens on long lenses is everything in frame is a more similar size, so the background is bigger and the foreground is a more similar size to the deep background, I guess. And when you're in such a vast landscape, with no interruptions, you can really take the camera back as far as you can possibly get. There's no trees or much that's going to interrupt your line of sight. So that was an approach that worked really well for us. Obviously, it doesn't work for every environment. If we had been in a forest or a jungle, that doesn't necessarily work. But for us, in a kind of big, it's almost like a desert out there or an ocean. You've got some big landmarks, but essentially there's a lot of flatness. So the long lens thing worked really well for us to bring the landscape forward.
What movies? Because like when you talked about, the compression with the long lens, and I think about the movie The Witch with the which they went far into northern Ontario to find trees or whatever, to give that sort of same idea, but instead they could, I guess, used a lens. But is there a movie or something that you turn to for inspiration for this?
We actually didn't watch that many movies. I did actually rewatch Lawrence of Arabia in terms of mainly for some specific sequences, but just the idea of thinking like, how do you shoot people in a huge place that is a lot of openness? And how do you build that sense of place? It's obviously about people in a place, so that in many ways they have equal importance. I'd even say that people are probably have more importance, but the sense of place and the atmosphere as well is like incredibly key to, like I said, the overall flavor of I guess like what you come away with as a viewer. So yeah, that was probably that's a real masterclass on long lenses in a landscape. And like I said, it really particularly applies when you're working with spaces that have a lot of openness.
Now, you'd mentioned the scouting sets, and the pre-production and location scouting took several months for this. And it was like sort of a huge undertaking. How involved were you with finding locations and making sure that you could shoot there? And making sure everything was right for the cinematography?
Yeah, very, very involved. And that was something Jane wanted from when she first called. She really did say, like, what are you doing the next year? to prepare, and then kind of the year after that to get into the shooting, and then I guess the post and stuff. So it was really important to her that she had a DP, the designer, our VFX supervisor as well was with us, and then of course like producers and location scouts on those early trips around us to start finding locations that would work. Another thing that was really important to Jane was that we were scouting the time of year that we'd be shooting. That part of New Zealand, both Jane and I know it quite well, and in winter it's incredibly green. It's like green screen green. It's a completely different place. You know, you could be in a commercial for butter or something. It's really green, and the grass is like almost fluorescent. So what we wanted was that silvery kind of sun bleached look that happens at the end of summer in New Zealand. So pretty much a year before we were shooting, we went to looking at places knowing that in a year's time it's going to look something like this.
Interesting. What is your process, or what was your process of working with the colorist in this to get this film, to get this look?
Yeah, color was a huge conversation for us, especially early on when we kind of started talking about the really big concepts, like, you know, which location will we choose, where do we put the elements in there, and then also obviously color is really big. And I think our initial thought was, there's so many elements going on. There's a house that needs to look old that's literally just been built. We've got quite a lot of VFX, which I'm really glad how kind of invisible they are, but there is actually quite a lot. Kind of costumes, animals, Montana, New Zealand, 1920s, 2020. You've got like a lot of things that kind of need to come together and be unified. And for us, this idea of a really restricted color palette was something we thought could, I guess, just unify it all, and also just give everyone every department kind of a clear window to work in terms of some of those choices. And we just kind of like that minimalism, I guess, like something very elegant about the fewest necessary things, and whether that's camera movement or you know, props or anything, just this kind of a minimalism was really exciting to us. And the landscape has a natural minimalism to it as well, because it's so kind of sparse in a way. And so a lot of the color is in the frame already. So you've got the grass, the animals, the leather, timber of the barn, and the floorboards, the walls of the house. There's already a kind of minimalism in that range. So we started with, what do you put in the frame? Starts kind of building the color palette. Because you never want, for me anyway, I never want it to feel too affected, or like too graded, I guess. It needs to feel real, and that, I guess, that can start by putting the things you put in frame are the colors that you want to be in the film. And I did a few very basic tests in prep, shooting some footage just at Panavision, actually, in the car park, with skin, sky, a couple little bits and pieces, and then took them into a suite and kind of saw what started to, actually, sorry, what I was really testing was filters, to see like, could a filter do something that couldn't be replicated in post, or should I just leave that to later? And we used a filter. We found a filter called 812 or 812, some people call it. It's like a half warming. And we ran that pretty much over everything. And the very basic tests I did, I liked what it did to the skin tones and the kind of overall, like additionally unifying. And then at the end of each day, I would usually spend, half an hour with our kind of on-set dailies colorist, a DIT, which was really useful just to kind of be able to do some color work in the calm of a dark room versus, in the blazing sun. And then Trish Cahill was our final colorist for the film. And yeah, we spent probably 3 weeks or so, just guess rediscovering the footage and again like reunifying it all kind of now that we knew which bits went back to back. So, but yeah, I'd say the big building blocks really start with choosing what's going to go in the frame, and then what else can you do to kind of emphasize, like reinforce or further minimize, like kind of bring that window into tighter and tighter kind of till you get to the sweet spot.
And you mentioned VFX. What, you know, they are seamless. So what were a lot of the VFX? Was it just set extensions and putting in like old stuff that they couldn't replicate? What was?
Yeah, there's a lot. There's actually online, if you Google, there's an alt, was our post house. Jay Hawkins was our VFX supervisor and just a fantastic collaborator. And again, it's kind of like shows the power of having someone on really early, because you're not just trying to kind of solve problems, but you're having someone working in the early foundations about how we're going to do this.
Yeah.
And for me, VFX is kind of like where are the seams, like where are the joins, where are the edges, where does art department end and VFX start? And for example, the town of Beach, where we first meet Peter and Rose, initially we'd planned to build that kind of whole town. It wasn't a kind of place you would probably find in New Zealand, something like that. So we knew there's going to be some building. And then when we kind of did the maths and the logistics and the kind of costed it out, it actually made sense to only build one building, the main kind of building, and then the rest would be VFX. But we'd already designed it, I guess. We knew what we wanted it, what we would build if we had have had the resources, or it made sense to, you know, if there were more scenes set there, or we're going to be there for a couple of weeks or something, it probably would have made sense to build more. And then the cattle as well. We had probably a couple of hundred cattle at most, but you know, in the script it should feel like 1,000 or so. It should feel like a lot, more than we had. So we did, I guess, like cow crowd, like I'm not sure how you'd call it exactly, but making more cows. And that's fascinating how when you look in the VFX breakdown, some really kind of beautiful work they did there. It wasn't just kind of tiling, but really building whole new digital cows. And again, that's kind of takes a lot of planning to know, like, what can you get away with for it to be seamless, because as soon as it feels like even one of the 1,000 feels not correct, then you give the game away. And also the roof of the house, the main ranch house, we built probably the bottom 2/3, and the top third is all visual effects. Again, like just running the practical reasons, running the math, it made more sense to do it that way. What else?
Well, I guess one of my questions for you then is, what would you say is the toughest scene to shoot, or was the toughest scene for you to shoot, and what made it so tough?
There's a lot of challenging scenes in there. You know, there's stuff that is really dreaded, like two people talking on horseback. That's like one of those undercover, I'd call like undercover difficult scenes, because it's not just the logistics of horses and people, but moving like a walk and talk, but you're up kind of high, and two people, animals. So that one of those early scenes of Phil and George talking just required a lot of planning and kind of, but again, that's kind of stuff I had done before, and most of that we had done before. It's just kind of tricky. Actually, the hardest stuff was the scene with the castration of the calf, mainly because even though that does really happen every day all over the world, it wasn't something we wanted to kind of inflict that on an animal just for the purpose of the film. And also I'm very glad there's a lot of kind of rules and regulations around how animals can be treated on set for good reason. And so that was a lot of planning of with our SFX and building kind of prosthetic animals and choosing the shots to make sure it felt that we could do what we were allowed to do, what was humane to do with animals up to a point, and then kind of cut and choose the shots that would then build that story without actually harming any animals. But it still needed to feel brutal, and also like the shots weren't kind of just chosen to be convenient. So that was probably the toughest scene to shoot, because there's so much planning involved, and it still needs to feel really like spontaneous and quite graphic as well. And it's very the symbolism also is kind of important for the it's really a emasculation kind of in one shot. Yeah, that was up there.
Now you've been nominated for an Oscar.
I have, yeah.
How do you plan to celebrate that night? Like, are you like, because it's, you know, it's such an achievement, so you got to go all out and have as much fun as. What are your plans to make the most of that night?
I think it's just going to be a great night to kind of celebrate with the whole team. I'm so happy that so many of us kind of got recognized and will be there. Not just the people whose names are kind of front and center, but like the producer and the sound team that did all the post work. And it's like you can see what a team effort is when you see that. And it's probably going to be the first time we'll all get to see each other again. Some of us have never even met before, you know, like myself and the sound designer. I guess actually we've met once, but you know, there's kind of a whole different, it's very rare to have everyone back in the same place. So I think we're just going to be kind of very, whatever happens, it really feels like a kind of colossal achievement to have that many nominations. And yeah, who knows? I'm you know, incredibly satisfied with the recognition so far.
Yeah, well, it's exciting. That's going to be such a fun night for you guys. So now I have one last question for you. We've been stuck in this pandemic for quite a while, and depending on where you are in the world and what's happening, some people have to go into quarantine more or aren't able to go out as much. And because of that, they've turned to streaming services. Is there a show or a movie you've discovered in the last year or two that you think people should check out?
I knew this question was coming, and I'm like, my mind always goes blank when someone tries to ask me like, what have you been doing? And I also got into that. We all went through so many waves of like pandemic psychology. I think at first it was like the world's ending, and then I should do something with this time, you know, like it's got to be productive.
Yeah, everyone was like, let's make bread.
Yeah, make bread. Make the bread, do that craft project that you never end up finishing. I wish I had a really exciting answer, and it feels like there should be like a really great narrative that comes out of the pandemic, but it's really kind of just like day to day, like getting through. I'm a big podcast listener.
Okay, so what's a podcast we should check out then?
I love one called 80,000 Hours, which is like super geeky, about it's like kind of interviewing different people who have these I guess like jobs that make a difference, but they're kind of not the kind of jobs you would usually think of as, they're not the front and center people, but it's like super fascinating. I think I often am, sometimes it feels like filmmaking isn't like saving lives. Well, it isn't saving lives. But as we saw in the pandemic, it definitely has an important role to play in like telling stories, and, you know, in something kind of historic like this, you know, Oscar nomination, being only the second woman, is kind of, there is like a great, you know, visibility and representation. I think it does what we do. It does impact, because it has the possibility of kind of having a really wide impact. But yeah, something like 80,000 Hours is kind of fascinating just to think about what other people are doing in the world, that jobs you've never even heard of. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you today.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And that's it for this week. Make sure to check us out at filmmakeru.com, or of course follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_you. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching. Today's episode of Filmmaker U is brought to you by our sponsors OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. And it's also brought to you by our other sponsors, AJA. Make sure to check out aja.com so that you can see how they can help you in your post-production needs.